The Ambassador Series is brought to you in part by Prairie Heart Institute, the University of Illinois at Springfield, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and through the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the inaugural session of the 2010-2011 season of the Ambassador Series. The Ambassador Series is a cooperative venture between WSCC Television and the University of Illinois Springfield, and it's made possible by the support from local businesses and corporations, most notably the H.D. Smith Company. The television portion of this program is sponsored in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and through the support of viewers such as you. It will be broadcast by WSCC Television and other PBS stations in Illinois. I'm Ed Strong, and I work for WSCC, and I'm pleased to moderate today's program. On the dais to my right and to your left are Dr. Gerald Grubel, President and CEO of WSCC TV. Seated next to him is the Honorable Tim Davlin, the Mayor of Springfield. Our speaker will be introduced in a moment. To my left and to your right is Dr. Vicki Megidson, Vice Chancellor of the University of Illinois. I'll introduce our guest in a moment, but first I would like to remind you that we have an opportunity for you to pose questions to our speaker by using the pieces of paper and the pencils that are located on each table. Written questions will be gathered by staff members and brought to me to try to ensure that the questions are not duplicated and posed to our speaker later. We also are very pleased today, thanks to the courtesy of Roland Machinery, to have a table of high school students from Virden. I would like for you to recognize the table directly in front of us. Thank you for coming. In our last season, we had the honor of hearing the sitting ambassador of Ireland to the United States, Michael Collins, who regaled us with some very interesting Irish tales and Irish humor, but also some facts and figures facing Ireland today. At this session, we have the privilege of having Ambassador James Kenney, who was the United States ambassador to Ireland during from 2003 to 2006. Ambassador Kenney served as ambassador under the Bush administration, but prior to that task, he was Executive Vice President of Kenney Construction Company, a major national company, and is President of Kenney Management Services and Kenney Construction Company. He served on the transition team of President George W. Bush, and later was appointed ambassador to Ireland. In addition to his involvement in construction, he has been deeply involved in community activities. Illinois Governor Jim Edgar appointed him to the Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority Board in 1991. He has also served in capacities with the Archdiocese on their board of directors, and has been part of the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin, Ireland since 2007. You have a more complete biography of the ambassador, but I would prefer not to take time away from the comments that he has to provide to us. I'm very pleased to introduce to you Ambassador James Kenney.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so kindly for inviting me to Springfield. It really is an honor and privilege, and now that I'm retired, as that's what they call us old ambassadors, is retired, and I get to put that on my stationery. It's great to get me out of the closet to talk about something that I had really loved and was a really important time in my life. So Mayor, thank you for coming today. I appreciate it. The mayor visited me in Ireland in 2006, promoted Springfield. Every year I think I had someone from Springfield coming to promote Springfield, which we did as one of our jobs. And thank you, Ed and Vice, for having me here today. I appreciate it. What I'd like to do is talk about today a number of things and really get into what I'd like to have is some really good dialogue in the question and answer period. But I want to explain why the importance to having a great relationship with Ireland is. And I'd like to explain what happened in Ireland that created this big economic turnaround in this country. And then basically what's happened to slow it down right now. And then in the end, kind of why we should keep this relationship at the forefront and being important to Americans and why we need to work on it. But the Ireland we all know and think about when you think about Ireland is like from the movies, the postcards, the naive charm of a great country. And you probably think about the thatched roofs on cottages, the fishermen's sweaters, freckled noses and herds of sheep roaming across lush green landscape. And even when we think about the big cities in Ireland, like Dublin, we might think about the brightly colored Georgian doors that go across that landscape, or the noise you hear coming out of the pubs and that friendly person inviting you in and makes you want to, and hearing that great music and making you feel like you want to dance. But let me tell you what happened in Ireland that really changed this country forever. Back in 1985, when unemployment rate was at 18% and it was heading to 20%, the country had to do something dramatic. Something had to change what was occurring in Ireland to make a difference. Ireland was one of the poorest countries in the European Union, but it quickly learned that in making these changes, it would have to do something dramatic. So, the plan was made to make broad, swift changes throughout Ireland, affecting many different areas in the country. Funding was going to be extremely important, and what would they do with any new money they could get? Well, education was their #1 priority, and they felt this on the theory that the people of Ireland were to be better educated across the board. The country would stand a better chance of being able to become an economic power in the European Union. So they devised this plan called the National Development Plan, and with a grant from the European Union, they started spending money on education. And they increased right away the numbers of students by about 35% that took up engineering or technology type subjects. Ireland's system of higher education graduates about 35,000 students a year. And even to this day, that is continuing to grow. And the postgraduate enrollment is rising also. The universities in Ireland are starting to get on the map. They have 2 of them now that are rated in the top 100 universities in Europe. But one of the interesting things they did there that I found very fascinating was mature students attending institutes like junior colleges and things that came. They had an increase in studying technology in that group of 14% right away in the first year. But what was amazing for me was to visit these institutes and see 35-year-old men and women carrying backpacks loaded with books, changing their careers forever, adjusting to this new operation of what was going on in Ireland. Another positive aspect of being educated in Ireland at the time was that the fact that these Irish people were now, men and women, were staying in Ireland. Previously, the lure of an educated person in Ireland would go to another country. They'd come to the States, and they'd take the cream of the crop out of Ireland would be gone. So one of the contributing factors to this positive change was the influx of foreign businesses, and particularly American businesses. At that time when this was occurring, their population increased about 15%, that these people were finally staying where they were born. The country was a popular destination for other people from Europe coming in. In May 1st of 2004, 10 new countries came into the European Union, and Ireland had the presidency of the European Union at that time. In my stay, countries like, for instance, I'll tell you, Poland. From 2003 to 2006, 100 Poles a day would enter Dublin Airport to come to live and work there. In the 40s, 50s, and 60s, those polls would have been going to Chicago. So this country was changing dramatically from what it had done in the past. So enticing these foreign businesses really what created that Celtic tiger that became to know. But what was the incentive for these big name companies to come to Ireland? Well, one, they offered them a low corporate tax rate. That was one of the first strings to get them there. Today, the corporate tax rate in Ireland is 12.5%. And that made it very appealing for high-tech companies like Microsoft and Dell and Intel. Intel's investment in Ireland alone is over $6 billion. And they are joined by the major pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Wyeth, Abbott, Baxter. All have major operations in Ireland. In fact, Pfizer, the leading selling drug, Lipitor, is made in Cork, Ireland. So that's what was going on. So today, there's roughly about 620 American companies that are now having either operations or headquarters in Ireland today. 14 of the top 15 pharmaceuticals in our country are in Ireland. They would do things like back in 1985 when the employment was so bad, they would entice companies like Apple to come over and start an operation. In fact, Apple in 86 was offered a 3% corporate tax if they came. So at the same time these things were going on, they created immediate work for the building trades, for the people of Ireland, for the communities where these operations would go, and they wanted it to develop into a long-term opportunity. So at that very same time, one of the other programs the Irish looked at was getting European aid grants to pay for some of the things they needed to do to keep these jobs here. Ireland was able to secure aid packages out of the European Union. They joined in 1973 with the British, and they got about 30 billion euro in those grants. And they took that money to improve their roads, their bridges. What they really did was update their schools and spend that money a lot on education, which I explained earlier. So Ireland was now investing in Ireland to make the country more desirable, both in terms of its people, and now Ireland was choosing, and their families were now staying. They were happy. They were wanting to be part of this new dynamic economy. And this is how Ireland created the infrastructure, was getting these grants to support this future economic success. Another plan was put in place which was kind of interesting. They called it the Social Partnership Agreement. This was done to bring in the unions, the farming organizations. The farmers used to have their own political party in Ireland. The community's volunteers were all brought in and they worked with them about how to sustain this, how to make this work for everybody. So the agreement now, it's in its 7th incarnation. It's going to go to 2016 today, but they did things in it where workplace stability, fair wages, employment rights, but they also in this program dealt with the environment and with social policy. Now the environment's a very important issue in Europe, it's very important in Ireland, and I can say this big green wave that's going across the globe is now here in America, and it's here to stay. I was last week out in Seattle and I was looking at a program for our high schools called Power Up. And why I say this big green wave is coming from Europe, and it is here, is that these kids are taught in high school about carbon footprint. These kids are coming home from school telling their parents to turn out the lights. And this is the type of thing that this is what's going on in Europe. It'll happen here. And I bring that up because this green wave is here to stay. So as you look at what happened, the government was having all these great experiences to move these people to new jobs. And explain how important this was at the time. As I mentioned, there were 620 American companies in Ireland. And to explain the significance of this, in June of 2004, we had what we call the U.S.-European Union Summit, where President Bush came over. And I was asked in the morning at about 7 a.m. to brief the President and his staff, and I had 8 minutes to do it, and this was the time I had to make Ireland shine. So the President was there, Condoleezza Rice was National Security Advisor, Secretary Powell, Don Evans, the Commerce Secretary, was there. And I started the conversation with this statement. I said, U.S. investment in Ireland is 3.5 times the size of the U.S. investment in India and China combined. And they looked at me like, what did you say? And I said, that's what's occurred here, gentlemen. I said, that's what U.S. has invested here. As I said to you before, Intel's investment is $6 billion alone. And as I said, they make a 300 millimeter chip that goes in almost every mobile phone, laptop, etc. And I said we need to pay attention to this because it's not only that our other friends that want to copy our technology, they don't have to go to the States anymore to steal it. They can just come right here and no one's looking. So these were some of the important things, but this is what happened. So Ireland became very wealthy from all these jobs and new operations. And why do I think this is really important for us to understand is this. As the Irish became very wealthy and the American companies employed 100,000 in Ireland, the Irish started investing in America. Their investments today are up to about 40 billion American dollars, and they employ about 85,000 Americans. So this is the balance of trade and why this is a good relationship. As we help them become more successful, they're providing jobs for us here. There's a company that you might not have even heard of called Glanbia. They make cheese. They have two operations, one in Boise, Idaho, and one in Clovis, New Mexico. And I think they're now the second or third largest cheese producer in the United States. So this is what these relationships are about, and this is why they're important, that we nurture them, we watch them, and pay attention to them, because the great part of the trade going back and forth. The European Union is the biggest trading partner in the United States that we have as a pact. Canada is our biggest trading partner as a single country. But every day across the ocean, when I left in '06, it was about $1.8 billion a day transfers back and forth between the European Union and the United States. So it's a very important part of our economic situation in the States. What I'd like to now is shift now to some of the areas that are a big part of Ireland's history and a lot of time that we at the embassy spent. And I want to talk about Northern Ireland and the United States' role and the integral role that we played in the ongoing movement toward bringing sustained peace to Northern Ireland. Peace between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland moved forward with a lot of hard work and the diligence of two prime ministers, Tony Blair from the UK and Bertie Ahern from Ireland. These gentlemen had unwavering support to get this peace process moving. And in the middle of it, we were there as the honest broker. Putting aside the social, political, and religious differences, these gentlemen in the United States helped pave the way for really impressive gains throughout that Northern Ireland issue. Beginning in 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement, continuing on when I was there in 2005 when the IRA declared and gave up their arms and put them beyond use. These were major things that were going on. And Ireland had seen a real rapid decline in the sectarian violence that had been taking place since 1969. Unemployment was moving. People had a mood that things were happening. It was actually the longest deployment of British troops in the history of the country was Northern Ireland, over 30 years. So peace in Ireland has played a valuable part in helping this incredible advancement the country had seen. There is a calm now among the citizens up there, and they have seen in bringing new confidence and wanting to remain in the island and actually remain up there. The reduction in violence also translated into smoother sailing for these American businesses. So a company from Chicago like Allstate has a big operation in Belfast that's very successful. Caterpillar Tractor has a set where they make generators in south of Belfast. So Illinois companies are participating in this, what is this peaceful movement that's going on up there. But a lot of it was from the guarantee of the American commitment to this peace process, which was very important. The feeling is hopeful that this storm may be passing now, and we hope it is. The Irish troubles are mainly behind us. The road is clear, and the people are looking at this as a real destination now in Europe for people to get back to go to Northern Ireland. It's a beautiful part of the country, and the future looks fairly bright for them. But over the weekend, I ended up hearing from the British that they've upgraded some of the threats of some dissident groups that are looking to spoil some of this, and we need to pay attention to this. But there's been a very strong commitment by the United States government to pay attention to this. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is working on this all the time. What they're trying to do is bring jobs to Northern Ireland as they're having this difficulty, because these men that are paramilitaries that gave up the weapons need jobs. And we need to train them, and we need to have them a place to go instead of going back to the guns. And it's on both sides of the British and Catholic part of this. And it's a long, sad history that I won't want to get into now. Maybe we'll have some questions, but there's there's great feelings that this is moving in the right direction. There's people that are going out to movies, to dinner. It's a different type of society up there now that feels they have a promising situation. And you should be very proud of the work that the United States put into this. And why do I feel this is important when we spent so much time on this when I was there? There's a lot of reasons. Right now, the world needs a peace process that's working. This one isn't perfect. It isn't finished. But it does have a lot of remnants of what we think can happen in other parts of the world. We had visitors from Bosnia and Kosovo. I mean, there today, all we're doing is separating sides. If we left, they'd be back fighting each other. These are situations the Palestine and the Israelis came to Ireland to look at this. We've had a lot of things going on. We've had now the people from Afghanistan, Pakistan, etc. visit Northern Ireland to see how this process worked. So we need that type of situation in the world today. We need to show that something's working, that this is possible. And as I said, the United States has been a big part of it. The other changes in Ireland that are interesting is to see this country that was about 99% white faces now is changing with open borders that they have in the European Union. So immigration came in, and it was a different explosion that the Irish people are still grappling with. They're still trying to understand it. So today there's about 12% are non-Irish immigrants, like I mentioned, from Poland, from China, from the Czech Republic, from Africa and India, and they take up residence in Ireland. It's a very diverse population. In the streets of Dublin now, you can hear 100 different languages going on every day. In fact, there's over 30,000 Muslims in Ireland now, today. There's 5 mosques in Ireland. It is really a different place than it was, as I talked about earlier, when you think about the movies. But Ireland is learning to adjust like this, just like sometimes we are. And the immigrants are being granted the right to vote. And this is something really, it was kind of out there for these politicians to agree to this. And they don't know what's going to happen with this. They're coming up where they might have some elections coming up now because of the government unrest. But it's a very interesting dynamic to see a country that has to learn to assimilate with new people coming in. And it was something that we worked with them on to say that, you know, as America was a melting pot, and we've made a success of it. So as you go through this and you look at Ireland being this great country on the edge of Europe, currently today there is a major recession going on in the country. Things have changed. To get into this, I'll explain it to you. It's the housing bubble I saw in Ireland was the biggest I'd ever seen anywhere. And this has crippled their banks. And you'll see a lot of news tomorrow in the papers probably about Ireland because they're making some decisions on Thursday about the banking. But to give you an idea how big this housing bubble was, there's a former prime minister in Ireland that owned a house in Dublin on a street called Asbury Road, which is one of the elite streets in Dublin. In 1996, he bought this house for 675,000 euros. In December of 2006, when I was leaving, he sold that house for 12 million euro. That was the bubble that was created in this country. This is where the banks got in trouble. The Irish had a very special place in their heart to own land because when the British ruled, they didn't get to own any. So they still, property and land was a big deal, but this bubble was unbelievably huge. And now that it's burst, it's really affected the economy. The banks were devastated. They were just so much piled up with real estate loans, it really hurt. So that's what's going on today. This big Celtic tiger is having some issues with that, and they're going to have to get through it. As I look at this, the relationship between the United States and Ireland has broadened. It's matured through the years, and it's an ongoing endeavor that we have to keep up. Because these two countries are strong. They're strong in their beliefs, in the way of life. Our economic accomplishments kind of like to mirror each other now. We like to talk about that. And today we don't see the influx of the Irish coming to America like we used to in the 50s and 60s and not even back to the 1800s. But they were here again in the 80s when I told you that unemployment. Today we probably have about, as I mentioned earlier to someone earlier, about 25,000 undocumented Irish living in America today that are part of that question about immigration. The Irish government, I always used to, when we used to meet in the White House, this was always one of the top issues that the Prime Minister would bring up with our President, was about making those illegal immigrants permanent citizens. But as we said, it was a very tough situation when you got to go get at the back of the line and start out like anyone else putting the paperwork in. But the Irish felt, because they had had all their young men, women, and people here that helped build this country, that they should just be granted these, and it was very difficult for the Irish to understand. But anyway, as you look across this relationship, it's really positive. It has really been a great opportunity for America to shine, and we have in what we've done with them. And as I go back and look at all and what the Irish are going to have to do today, with everything going on in the world to get attention from the United States, they're going to have to really work hard. We have so many issues in 175 countries knocking at our door, either wanting money or our attention, even our closest friends like the Brits. I always used to tease the British and Israelis about, I said, well, Ireland is the only country in the world that has a standing meeting every year with the President of the United States, and it has for the last 20 years. But that day was St. Patrick's Day when the Prime Minister of Ireland comes. But the British and Israelis would always get me because they hated to hear that, because they always felt like they get the door first. But on that day in America, the Irish get the door. And it's been a great time. I just have to tell you, I had probably one of the best jobs I could ever think about. I had a chance to serve our country. I had a chance to see the good things we do around the world. I learned what our country was up to around the world, which is absolutely unbelievable, and you have no idea. To give you an idea, when the tsunami hit in Indonesia, we had an aircraft carrier heading in for home at Christmas in San Diego. When the tsunami hit, this aircraft carrier turned around and went back to Indonesia. They baked 300 loaves of bread a day and didn't take a shower for the entire trip. And by the time they got to Indonesia, they wanted that water to be able to give to the people. Our men and women on that ship got off that ship. They weren't carrying arms. They weren't carrying anything but shovels, tools, first aid, anything they can. Food and the bread they baked. The Indonesians today respect immensely what we did. The foreign minister from Ireland, who he always had tough days with us and our stances on certain parts of the world, came back from Indonesia and said, "You can't believe what your American soldiers are doing. It is incredible, it is impressive, and thank you." And that's what our country does around the world that we don't seem to get on the TV or know about. I'm very proud of our country. I was very proud to serve, and it was a great opportunity for me. So I look forward to having your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those enlightening and I think somewhat challenging comments. And now to challenge you with some questions. A question, and there are two questions, and I'm going to try to link them together. One of them talks about the increase in terrorist activities on the part of the IRA. And the other one is, I guess, a counter to that. How safe is it to visit Northern Ireland at the present time?
Well, I'll answer that last part. It's very safe to visit Northern Ireland. There's a couple Protestant friends of mine on the political side up in Northern Ireland that were farmers, lived right outside Belfast, had never in 30 years seen any violence or anything else. The violence goes to certain parts of the neighborhoods where these situations occur. And what we worried about was these splinter groups that don't want to give up that the whole island should be Ireland. And they don't want to give up after training for 30 years that this is where what their goal was to kick the British out of Ireland. In Northern Ireland, the biggest problem that some of the communities have is feeling that they're, one, that they're not British, two, they're not Irish, and three, they're being pushed off the island. In that regard, there's a very much of an unrest. This is a generational problem that needs to be addressed, and it will take generations to solve. They have these peace walls dividing neighborhoods between Catholics and Protestants that go up to about 16 to 20 feet high. Kids at 4 years old are taught to throw rocks over them at their neighbors. I mean, this is the type of thing that goes on. Is it getting better? Yes. One of the answers I will share with you is integrated schools. These young people need to go to school together to understand each other better. They will live across the street from each other and never play soccer or a sport with each other because of who they are. It is that sectarian. It's just a bad situation. It's getting so much better, though, than what it was. And that's what we have to keep working on, is to make sure they stay the course and work at it. The splinter groups that are causing some of the problems, and as I said, the alert went up in London last Friday night, they're desperate because they're not getting attention. There's been calm since 2005 with a few incidents a year ago with a couple British soldiers that were killed delivering pizza. But as far as the attitude of the politicians involved and the groups that were part of the IRA that are now politicians, they do not want to go back to the guns. They want to work this out, and that's what's going on. So they've even come out to say that anyone that is involved in these splinter groups, they will turn them in and hopefully be prosecuted and sent to jail.
A question that is obviously of interest to Americans, and that is, does Ireland have a large number of baby boomers as we do in the U.S., and if so, what are the implications of that for the healthcare infrastructure in Ireland? This is kind of a loaded question because obviously it reflects upon the U.S. and Ireland comparison.
Yeah. Ireland's kind of fortunate in Europe that they do have the youngest population in Europe. So they have a very young population. They don't have the baby boomer situation going on. They will in the future, but presently today, no. And that is, and their healthcare system is government system. There is a private system that developed as the country got more successful. There's American companies coming over to set up operating clinics, doing things like that, and on the private side they've been somewhat successful. So there's really two programs in Ireland. I operated under the British and Irish system as far as healthcare, and we studied a lot of that, and it's much different than you would believe, say, here in the States. But one of the things we tried to do was learn what some of these countries were doing on some topics. So if you take a country like Ireland, we had heart disease, cystic fibrosis, and diabetes being a very common growth. Say like diabetes, 6% of the Irish population have it, 7% of the American population have it, and it's growing by exponentially. It's a real fear. So we would bring doctors and researchers from 3 countries, from Britain, Ireland, and America, to meet. Had never seen each other before and discuss these. One was diabetes that I did at the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin. And in the first day, they were talking about tests and experiments they had doing and sharing it, and they had never talked before. These are the things we need to do on healthcare, is to find out what things are working in other countries and share that. And if you think this is 2010, and we haven't had a lot of time to do that. A lot of the doctors in Ireland, in Great Britain, Australia, a lot of them were trained in the U.S. So they know a lot of our techniques, they know a lot of our ideas, they just don't have the equipment.
Ambassador, you talk quite a bit about the peace process in which you were very deeply involved. Are there any lessons that you might have from that might be helpful were you in a position to advise people today in Afghanistan?
One of the things that I think you learn about these situations and looking at them and studying them from the outside, and I get to do it from 10,000 feet, is that when incidents occur in a village or town, the hurt when someone is killed and family members, there's real pain and suffering. And the memories only go backwards. They only go back to that event. They don't go forward as to think, what are the possibilities for peace? This is exactly what's occurring in Afghanistan, in places like that, Iraq, when these events occur. Someone's family member is killed. And this is how do you get the people to think forward instead of backward? And who's responsible? And this is the problem that's going across the globe. It's hard. It's not easy. It's difficult work. Is everybody perfect? No, we're not perfect. We've made mistakes. But as I said, this peace process got people to give up those thoughts of going backwards. George Mitchell, the senator from Maine, was one of these great people who decided to show up in Ireland for 3 months under Bill Clinton and stayed 3 years. Great tenacity to sit down and work with these people. They had never would sit at the same table together, ever. And particularly in public, to get a picture of that would have been just a disgrace for either side. But work continuing, and now they would sit down at a table and talk today. They don't want a lot of pictures taken, but at least they'll do it.
A question of interest as to how you became an ambassador and how one becomes an ambassador?
You get involved in politics, and then you get too involved, and then they ask you to do one of these jobs. We have some young students here. I'm going to tell you, working for the State Department and doing a job like this, maybe not even being an ambassador, being a learning foreign policy, learning about what's going on in the world is very, I ask you to go on the State Department's website. They need the brightest and the best. There's a lot of young men and women that are doing Herculean task and work to help your country advance its cause and to help people. I remember when the President asked me, we went on this trip to Nicaragua, and I ran into a woman down there. They had just been through an election with the Sandinistas. And this woman, an American woman, was out in the field trying to get a fair election, risking her life every day with what was going on in Nicaragua. I looked at this person and I got the briefing, and I just couldn't believe it. She's not a soldier. She's never going to get a medal. No one in the States is probably going to know what she did. But she was out there risking her life every day to get a fair election in this country so these people would have a chance at some type of democracy in Nicaragua. Now the Sandinistas, I will tell you, are back in from the last election, but you as young people have an opportunity. It is great to serve your country. It's great to look at the State Department website to learn about what you could do for your country, and it's a great opportunity. So I'd advise you to tell your students and fellow people to look at it as a career.
A combination of questions. One of them is, who actually put together the model back in the 1980s that created the resurgence? And a related corollary question, could something like that be done in a place such as Mexico?
Boy, that's a really good question. There was his title is called the Secretary General, and he was in a department in Ireland that helped put this National Development Plan together. And it was dynamic that major changes would have to take place and sacrifice would have to take place in the budgets to be able to do this, as I said. So they put education as their #1 item on this list of, and I could go through the list of things, what they did. But they sat down and they knew things had to change. They knew at the time that this was it. Ireland was just the poor child of the European Union, and they were heading for disaster. So they, amongst themselves, decided to do this, and they did it. They had to cut services in areas. They had to change their thoughts about the way things were going to be done, and they all agreed to it, not all the time willing and able to go, but this is what started the ball rolling. You know, in the 1950s, they had a 0 corporate tax rate in Ireland for foreign companies coming in, and they didn't get people to come. They did things like, I'll tell you simple things that was very impressive to American companies. Sandy Weil was the chairman of Citicorp Corporation, one of the major corporations in the world. He was starting a small operation in Ireland for financial services. The Irish government met him at the airport and gave him a police escort to his brand new office to the door, and he got out and met the Prime Minister at the door of his new office. And that was the welcome he got. He gets back in the car and says, I've never been treated like that anywhere where I brought jobs. He said, get them more jobs. We're going to put more people here. I think they're up to like 2,000, 2,500 people now in Dublin. But those are the type of things they went out of their way to show what a job meant to them. And they were serious, and they wanted to make it work. So that's what they did. And Mexico, the only way we're going to, it's getting pretty frightening right now what's going on in Mexico, and it's scary. And sometimes we don't have a lot of attention span to look because of all the problems going on in the world, but this one's at our border, and we're going to get part of this coming up in the next few years. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's scary what's going on in Mexico, and even in some of the areas that I know are more business-oriented, and I think that the only way to solve the border problem is to help Mexico get successful. But that's going to take a lot of work. It's going to have to take a huge amount of tasks to help these people get their economic picture going in the right direction. It is not easy. And Mexico, as I said, is a much bigger country than Ireland. But we need to spend time on that, yes.
A question that might be difficult to respond to, frankly. I've been informed that the outgoing Israeli ambassador to Ireland recently warned his successor that he will be assuming one of the most challenging or worst positions in the Israeli diplomatic corps. Can you elaborate on why that might have been said?
Just to give you an idea, the Israeli ambassador in Ireland gets bodyguard protection. He has a tough job in Ireland. There have been 2 or 3 mayors of Dublin that have been Jewish. The Jewish community in Ireland is down to a very small group of people. They have a congressperson, I'll call, that's in what they call their Doyle. I met with him several times. It relates back to the relatives in America. But what happened in the 80s is Arafat started visiting Ireland, and he would meet with the government officials to tell what's going on and that the Israelis were beating up on people without weapons, et cetera, et cetera. And the Irish felt this pain because of their history with Britain. And so there was a little bit of understanding what the Palestinians were going through. And that created some of the animosity that might be today, and the tough job that the Israeli ambassador in Dublin would have. And that has been going on, and there's been some tough words said back and forth. And they've had trips from Ireland over to actually Palestine now and Jerusalem, et cetera, looking at what's going on, and they report back, and it's sometimes not flattering of Israel. So they've kind of, the Irish in their background have felt these people need help and someone should back them. And a lot of Europe feels that way, quite frankly, in that regard. The Israelis are close friends of ours, and we need them. I will share with you right now, we're looking at selling $31 billion worth of aircraft right now to Saudi Arabia. They are going to be our buffer right now in between, because the Saudis are our friends, between us and Iran and Israel. And hopefully they can stop what might transpire there in the next few years. So we need friends, and we need and we are always going to protect Israel. That's what we've done in the past, and I think we'll do in the future. So, yeah, in Dublin, the Israeli ambassador has a tough time.
Let me pose the last question of today to you. And I'm not sure whether this comes from somebody with Irish heritage or not. But the question is, in terms of the Irish political culture, do the Irish support their government now? And if that's the case, what lessons might be gained by Americans who seem at times not to be terribly supportive of their government?
It's a parliamentary system in Ireland where there's a prime minister and elected officials run the government, and then they have coalitions, which is transpiring now. So I will share with you, the politicians in Ireland are very talented, and I know a lot of that came over to the States when they immigrated. Very good dialogue, very good discussions, but the Irish do have times where they're very critical of the government. And as I said, I mentioned earlier, like the farmers had their own political party and were very strong when farming was a big part of the income and operation in Ireland. And they're having some protests now as to what the government cuts are in the budget, because these cuts are severe. But as far as politicians, they're very talented politicians. There is, right now, they hold, very few seats are holding the power in Dublin now in the government, and there could be an election very shortly for a new prime minister. But that could be called and everything else. But as far as politicians, they mirror a lot. There's a lot of mirrors back and forth between Ireland and us. But do their people love their country? You get them outside of that, and they really care about any little thing they can build Ireland up on, any person that is a hero, an actor, U2, Bono, whatever. They will build upon that to make their country look better, so they back that type of person. So right now, I will share with you, Bono's work in Africa is amazing. He can name every leader of every African country that's there. He walks around Dublin without bodyguards or anything else. He walks around free. They like that type of person that's somewhat more natural and homey and good person, so they'll back him, and they do care for that. Any of their sports teams and all that, they're sports crazy as we are. So, all right.
Ambassador, thank you very much.
Okay.
We have a presentation for you by Mayor Tim Dabney.
Thank you, Ambassador. It's an honor and privilege to share the stage with you here today. As a fellow Irishman, I in spite of the fact that we're two Irishmen here up on stage, the building stayed up, the stage didn't fall down, and though we do have some other fine Irishmen, the O'Sheas and the Codys and the O'Byrnes are still here. But I just want to tell one quick story about the ambassadors. He mentioned I had the opportunity to meet with him at the embassy, the American Embassy in Dublin, and he was going through a very interesting time, and I know he could write a book, and probably will, and could write several books on the things that happened and the occurrences. But one of the interesting ones was that we were there right after Hurricane Katrina, and as slow as we know that FEMA was to respond, we can't blame the Irish, because a call was made, and I know that Ambassador Kenney intervened, and a call was put out for 30,000 laptops tomorrow. And it was the Irish that produced that in one day. The Dell manufacturing plant in Limerick put them out in one single day. And it's amazing that the type of growth that's gone on over there. And so I know it's very interesting times, but my quick story to tell you about the ambassador was one that he allowed me to tell. I asked him yesterday if I could tell this today. And this will tell you somewhat about the integrity and the nonpartisan patriotism, I think, that comes out of this man. And that was a story was that shortly before our delegation had shown up at the embassy, there was a group of legislators, both congressmen, and I believe there's a few senators in there, and the ambassador was running just a little bit late. And so he asked his secretary to put him inside his inner office, a beautiful, beautiful office. And he walked in, and I don't know the exact numbers, Ambassador, but there was about a half a dozen on one side of the room and about a half a dozen on the other side of the room. And the ambassador walked in, and he said, you know, what's going on here? And the secretary said, well, these are the Democrats and these are the Republicans. And we know that the two areas that you're not supposed to breach are religion and politics. And I think that you probably took care of both of those in your statement, as I recall. And what you said to all of them when you walked in the room, you said, "With God as my witness, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. I'm going to ask you to leave the embassy if you're not here as an American." And it took just a few seconds before those crowds came together. And I think it did. It showed a lot about the integrity of what he meant and what he wanted his job to be as the ambassador, that we are all Americans over there. And I don't believe there was any bipartisan. I think from that point on, there were no partisan words that were spread from there. And I think that certainly says a lot about your integrity. Ambassador, I won't read the entire proclamation. So many of the things that are in this proclamation were read as we heard your bio. But most importantly, I'm going to read the last line, and that's that, now therefore I, Timothy J. Davlin, Mayor of the City of Springfield, Illinois, do hereby proclaim Wednesday, September 29th, 2010, to be Ambassador James Kenney Day in the City of Springfield. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Ambassador, again, I want to thank you for a very enlightening conversation with us, because it was a conversation. It was shared from the heart. The questions were interesting and dealt with in a very appropriate manner. We've had a very good session. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, and good night.
The Ambassador Series is brought to you in part by Prairie Heart Institute, the University of Illinois at Springfield, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and through the support of viewers like you. Thank you. For a DVD copy of this edition of the Ambassador Series, send $24.95 to Network Knowledge, P.O. Box 6248, Springfield, Illinois 62708. You may also order with your credit card by calling 800-232-3605. Be sure to include the program name, broadcast date, and topic.